How did the Mongolians survive freezing winters without modern technology? Imagine living where the wind cuts like knives and the ground stays frozen for half the year. No electricity, no central heating, yet entire families thrived on the steppe. What ancient survival tricks kept them warm when nature tried to kill them? The Mongolian ger, also known as a yurt, is one of the most ingenious pieces of architecture ever designed for survival. On the vast, treeless steppe, where winter winds roar at 50 miles an hour, this round tent became both fortress and home. Its secret lay in its perfect balance of simplicity, portability, and insulation. A ger begins with a wooden frame that forms a circular wall and roof lattice. Over this skeleton, thick layers of felt are laid, made from the compressed wool of the family's own sheep. The felt acts like nature's insulation, dense enough to trap warm air, yet breathable so moisture can escape. Several layers are added in winter, often covered by an outer sheet of canvas or leather to block wind and snow. The result is a living space that stays surprisingly warm, even when the outside world is frozen solid. At the center sits a small stove, vented through a pipe in the roof. Fueled by dried animal dung, it fills the ger with steady heat. The round shape distributes warmth evenly and prevents corners from collecting cold air. Families sleep close to the ground where the air is warmest, and thick carpets or animal hides line the floor to stop heat loss. Everything about the ger is designed with purpose. Its circular form resists wind pressure better than straight walls. The low roof traps heat efficiently. The entrance always faces south, away from the worst northern winds, ensuring that the moment you step inside, the temperature difference feels dramatic. Despite its ancient design, the ger outperforms many modern homes in energy efficiency. It can be dismantled in under an hour, packed onto camels or oxen, and rebuilt miles away by sunset. Families migrated seasonally, carrying their insulated homes wherever grazing was best. For Mongolians, the ger symbolized balance with nature. It was strong, warm, and made entirely from what the land provided. In the world's harshest climate, their circular homes stood as warm, glowing symbols of endurance and ingenuity, turning the endless cold steppe into a place where life could not only survive, but thrive. Mongolian winters punish exposed skin in seconds, so survival begins with clothing that traps heat and sheds wind. Herders mastered a system of layers, each chosen for a specific job. Closest to the body came soft wool, or felt to wick sweat and hold warm air. Over that, they wore thicker wool garments that created loft, the tiny pockets where body heat collects. The outermost layer was usually fur or heavy felt, cut long to block drafts and stitched tight at cuffs, collar, and hem. Wool mattered because it still insulates when damp. Snow melts against warm bodies, yet the crimped fibers keep heat from escaping. Felted wool adds another advantage. It is wind-resistant and easily repaired with a needle, a thimble, and a strip of sinew. Herders patched clothing beside campfires while animals grazed, turning garments into tools that lasted for years. Design details increased warmth without modern zippers. Robe-like deals wrapped across the chest and tied with a broad sash, sealing out gusts and creating a wide pocket for hands or small tools. Trousers were layered with felt liners in the coldest months. Boots were lined with sheep wool or felt insoles, sometimes with fur cuffs to stop spindrift from pouring in. Mitts and hoods completed the system so no skin met the wind. Clothing also worked with the rhythms of daily labor. Layers came on before dawn chores, then peeled back during riding or herding to prevent sweating because moisture steals heat. At night, outer garments became blankets, and fur caps served as pillows. Nothing was single-purpose. Everything could be repurposed in an emergency, from a sash used as a rope to a hood tied as a sling. Color and materials signaled season and status. White felt reflected sun on brilliant winter days, while dark robes absorbed heat in weak light. Families stored spare layers in the ger near the stove, ready for blizzards that arrived without warning. Warmth came not from a single coat, rather from a smart sequence of natural fibers working together against the steppe. The system was simple, repairable, portable, and brutally effective in winter. With few trees on the steppe, Mongolians relied on the fuel that followed their herds. Dried animal dung, usually from horses, cattle, sheep, and goats, powered stoves, boiled tea, and kept gers habitable through nights that would freeze water indoors. Turning waste into warmth demanded skill, timing, and constant work. Collection began where herds slept. Morning frost dried fresh droppings quickly in the thin, cold air. Families shaped the pieces into flat cakes or left them as nodules, then spread them on sunny slopes or hung them from ropes to cure. Properly dried fuel burned clean and steady. Poorly dried fuel smoked and wasted heat, so people watched weather and rotated stacks like farmers tending grain. Storage was an art. Fuel walls ringed winter camps, stacked with gaps for airflow and capped with felt or turf to shed snow. Children helped by gathering during rides, flicking dung onto sleds or into sacks. The chore never truly ended. Every new grazing ground offered another harvest, which meant the stove could follow the herd anywhere. Dung burns differently from wood. It releases a slow, even heat with little flame, perfect for the iron stoves at a gers center. Tea kettles sat constantly on the grate, and the stew pots simmered for hours without scorching. Because the smoke contains few sparks, it posed less risk to felt walls than crackling branches. Ash from the fire became useful too. Mixed with water, it cleaned pots and neutralized odors around the hearth. Fuel choice shaped daily rhythm. Riders planned routes that passed old corrals, knowing those places held dry, reliable cakes. After snowfalls, families brushed clean patches to uncover stored stacks. In the storms, a single armload kept a ger warm long enough to cook and sleep. Then someone braved the wind for more. The practice also kept camps sanitary. Manure removed from living spaces attracted fewer insects in spring and reduced smells that drew predators. On a treeless plain, energy independence came from animals themselves. Herds provided movement, milk, meat, and the heat that made survival possible. It was renewable, local, odor-managed, and perfectly matched to nomadic life in winter. Mongolian winters demanded strength, not delicacy. Food was fuel, and survival depended on calories that could outlast the cold. The traditional diet focused on fat, protein, and dairy, a combination that powered herders through long rides and freezing nights. Vegetables were rare on the open steppe, so every meal came from animals that grazed outside the ger. Meat was eaten in generous portions, often boiled in large pots until tender. Mutton and horse meat were the main staples because they provided steady energy and stored well in the cold. Fat was treasured, never trimmed away. It coated the stomach, slowed digestion, and kept the body warm for hours. During harsh weather, people drank the broth thick with floating fat, calling it liquid fire for its ability to chase away the chill. Dairy products filled the rest of the diet. Milk from mares, cows, goats, and yaks became butter, yogurt, and cheese. Fermented mare's milk, or arog, was both a drink and a source of quick energy. Dried curds called arul lined shelves inside gers, lasting through the winter without spoiling. These tough, tangy snacks softened in tea or soup, providing steady protein when meat ran low. Meals were simple but rich. A single bowl of meat soup, heavy with fat, could sustain a rider through a full day on horseback. The balance of animal fat, protein, and fermented milk created natural insulation for the body. It boosted metabolism and helped the blood carry warmth to the skin. Herders viewed food as survival equipment. Each meal came with deep respect for the animals that gave it. Waste was unthinkable. Every bone, drop of milk, and slice of fat had a purpose. Even in today's Mongolia, traditional dishes like boiled mutton and salty milk tea reflect this ancient logic. The steppe's endless cold shaped a diet designed not for comfort, but endurance. It turned nourishment to a daily act of survival and gratitude. Herding shaped every part of Mongolian life. Sheep, goats, yaks, camels, and horses provided food, fuel, transport, and even warmth. On the open steppe, people and animals depended on each other through months of brutal cold. Families moved with their herds, following grass and sheltering in valleys where wind and snow were less severe. During winter, the herds themselves became a source of heat. Animals gathered tightly at night, their combined body warmth creating small pockets of comfort against the icy air. Herders often slept nearby under hides, letting the gentle heat from their animals seep through the cold ground. In extreme blizzards, children and elders stayed close to the livestock pens, while riders patrolled to keep the herd from scattering. Each animal had a purpose. Sheep and goats gave milk, wool, and meat. Horses offered transport, milk for arag, and sometimes meat in the harshest conditions. Yaks and camels carried heavy loads, produced thick hair for felt, and survived where few animals could graze. Even manure, once dried, became the main source of fuel. Nothing was wasted. Daily work with the herds kept people moving, which was vital for warmth. Riding, roping, and hauling water demanded constant motion that prevented the body from freezing. Herders learned to control sweat by adjusting layers and pacing their labor carefully. Moisture could kill faster than frost, so they worked with steady precision rather than speed. Herding also built rhythm and cooperation within families. Each person had tasks, from milking to mending ropes, timed with the animal's behavior and weather. The cycle of movement, rest, and watchfulness became its own form of endurance training. Through centuries, this close relationship with herds created a self-sustaining system. The animals gave heat, strength, and nourishment, while humans gave care, guidance, and protection. In the endless winters of the Mongolian steppe, survival was measured by the health of the herd. When animals thrived, people endured. When the herd suffered, life itself froze with them. Winter on the steppe is a moving target, so families moved too. Nomads studied wind, snowpack, and grazing like a science, then shifted their camps to places that bent the weather in their favor. Sheltered valleys were the classic wintering grounds. Hills blocked the north wind. Willow thickets trapped drifting snow, and south-facing slopes collected weak sunlight that eased the cold. Migration followed a tested pattern. In late autumn, people packed their gears, loaded animals, and traveled to lower elevations where storms were gentler. Herds grazed on dry grasses protected by terrain. Water came from springs that stayed open or from ice the herders chopped each morning. Trails wound through passes chosen for safety rather than speed. A wrong ridge could funnel wind into a killing gale. Once a winter camp was chosen, families mapped it like architects. Gers formed a ring against the wind, with entrances facing south. Corrals sat on slightly higher ground, so meltwater did not pool and freeze hooves. Fuel stacks stood downwind, and spare felt was stowed near the stove for sudden, cold snaps. Old campsites were revisited because people remembered where storms broke and where they spared. Valleys offered more than warmth. Vegetation there gave animals shelter and forage, which meant milk continued to flow and meat stayed on the bone. Calving and lambing could continue despite deep winter if mothers were protected. Hunters scanned valley edges for game flushed by weather, adding meat and skins to stores. Children gathered brush for kindling and learned to read snow like a map. Movement itself conserved life. Staying put on the open plain risked starvation when winds scoured grass to ice. By shifting camp, families balanced pastures that had been grazed with those that had rested. Neighbors coordinated routes to avoid stripping a single valley bare. Good leadership kept everyone fed without conflict. This mobility created confidence. People knew the land intimately, the way wind curved around foothills, and how sun returned earliest to certain benches. In a world of ice and sky, choosing the right valley meant warmth, water, quiet air, and grazing. It turned a brutal season into one that could be endured. When spring loosened the rivers, camps lifted, and the long northward journey began for fresh grass. Wool kept daily warmth, but in deep cold, the steppe demanded skins. Herders turned hides into armor against wind that sliced through ordinary cloth. Each skin carried qualities shaped by its animal. Sheepskin was soft and insulating for routine work. Goatskin shed wet snow better. Horsehide was tough for riding gear. Yak hides delivered heavy-duty protection for blizzards. Preparation began the moment an animal was butchered. Skins were scraped clean with bone or metal blades, then stretched on frames to dry. Fat was rendered into tallow and rubbed back into the hide to keep it supple. Smoke from dung fires cured the fibers and added a water-resistant finish. Sewing followed with sinew thread, which swelled in moisture to seal seams. Design put function first. Long sheepskin deals wrapped across the body and belted tight, trapping layers of warm air. Hooded coats cut from fox or wolf guarded the face during rides. Mitts with separate trigger fingers allowed rope work without exposing skin. Boots combined thick felt liners with rawhide soles that gripped ice. Herders stuffed straw or dry grass inside for extra insulation on forced marches. Fur placement mattered. Hair facing inward trapped heat for sleeping garments. Hair turned outward repelled snow and sleet for travel. Edges were bound with leather to stop fraying, and ties replaced metal fasteners that froze solid. A good coat balanced weight with mobility, so riders could mount quickly without tearing seams. Clothing rotated with tasks. Heavy fur came out for pre-dawn chores. Then lighter coats took over while the sun climbed. Children wore layered vests pieced from scraps, showing that nothing from a hide was wasted. Damaged panels were patched with contrasting fur, giving garments the textured look of the steppe itself. Skins also served beyond clothing. Sleeping covers lined with hair turned inward created warm nests near the stove. Saddle blankets of thick hide kept horses' backs dry and warm. In emergencies, a hide became a windbreak, a sled, or a shelter sheet over a broken gear wall. Animal skin clothing joined craft with landscape. Every cut and stitch answered a specific wind, a known trail, a certain chore. It was warmth you could ride in, sleep under, repair by firelight, and trust when the temperature sank without bitter mercy. Nights on the steppe rewarded people who slept together. Communal sleeping conserved heat, protected the youngest and oldest, and made night tasks easier when storms rattled the gear. Families arranged bedding around the stove or hearth in a careful pattern. Elders and small children took the warmest spots, set slightly downwind of the door. Strong adults formed an outer ring that blocked drafts and got up quickly if animals cried or the fire needed fuel. Bedding was layered like clothing. Thick felt covered the floor to stop ground chill. On top came folded carpets, stacked hides, and padded quilts that trapped warm air. Everyone slept in wool underlayers and kept outer garments near at hand. In the coldest months, fur coats doubled as blankets. Boots were propped open by the stove so they would not freeze stiff by morning. Position carried meaning. The honored northern side of the gear remained a sacred zone for altars and treasured objects. Sleeping lines respected that space. Couples shared blankets to cool heat and reduce moisture loss from breath. Children slept between adults, which steadied their temperature through the night. If the wind shifted, people rotated slightly and tucked edges tighter. Small movements mattered because heat leaked fastest at seams. Ventilation was controlled with simple habits. The roof crown stayed cracked to let smoke rise, yet felt flaps were adjusted so warm air did not escape too fast. Someone always listened for the soft change in draft that signaled a dying fire. Ashes were spread thinly to preserve coals until dawn. A pot of tea sat beside the stove, ready for anyone who woke chilled. Communal sleeping strengthened attention and trust. People fell asleep to the sound of shared breathing, horses stamping outside, and the low hiss of dung on the coals. If snow pressed against the walls, the outer ring of sleepers rose together to beat the felt and break the crust. By morning, the group had passed the night as a single body. Warmth came from wool, fire, and the steady company of family. Heat began at the center. Early gers used a simple earthen hearth, later replaced by iron stoves that sat on flat stones beneath the roof opening. Whether pit or stove, the goal was the same: create steady warmth with minimal smoke, then direct it through the crown so the felt walls stayed dry. A small fire, well managed, outperformed a large, wasteful blaze. Fuel preparation made everything work. Dried dung cakes were stacked near the door for easy access. The fire started with scraped shavings, then thin cakes, then thicker pieces once a bed of coals formed. Dung burns with an even glow and few sparks, a perfect match for felt covers and low ceilings. Families learned the sound of a proper burn, a soft rush instead of a crackle. Airflow was a craft. The door faced south to avoid the worst winds, which stabilized the draft. In calm weather, the crown flap opened wide, so smoke rose cleanly. In storms, it narrowed to hold heat, yet never fully closed, because a sealed gear fills with moisture and stale air. Pots sat low over the flame for meat and milk. A second trivet kept tea at a gentle simmer throughout the night. Safety came from routines. A ring of stones defined the hearth edge. Children were taught to step around it as soon as they could walk. Sparks were rare, but a felt screen stood ready beside the entrance in case of sudden gusts. Ash was valuable. A layer under the fire moderated heat, while cool ash mixed with water cleaned pots and absorbed odors near the stove. Night strategy focused on coals. Before sleeping, someone banked the fire, pushing red embers together and covering them lightly. By dawn, the hearth still breathed. One breath on the coals, one thin cake, and the flame returned. Heat stones warmed by the fire slipped into bedding or boots, stretching comfort until sunrise. The hearth gathered cooking, repair, and talk into one bright circle. It dried wool, cured hides, and held the quiet of long winter evenings. Indoors, fire was warmth, light, rhythm, and calm. On the steppe, survival moved at the speed of a horse. Herds spread across frozen grasslands, and families stayed alive by riding to water, forage, and shelter ahead of storms. Horses carried people, hauled gear, and gave heat as living companions when the temperature plunged. A rider could press thighs and calves along a warm barrel and feel blood return to numbed feet. In blizzards, a horse's body shielded wind for children or elders during short halts. The animal felt the weather shift before humans did, lifting its head and turning away from trouble long before clouds announced it. Winter travel followed known routes that balanced grazing with safety. Riders read drifts and crusted snow the way sailors read waves. If ice hid grass, horses punched through with hard hooves to uncover enough forage for the herd to keep moving. Snow-bridged riverbanks where crossings were safest. At night, the animals stood tail to wind, their rumps shedding spindrift from the camp edge. Equipment turned motion into warmth. Felt saddle pads held heat against the horse's back and kept sweat from freezing. Rawhide girths stayed tight in cold. Short stirrups let riders stand and pump blood through legs on long marches. Reins were looped around mitts rather than gripped bare because skin froze to leather in minutes. Riders carried awls, hobble cords, and a small knife for emergency repairs by firelight. Food and drink were planned around the horse. Stops matched the animal's need for water, which kept riders from lingering in deadly wind. Mares milk-fed families in seasons when meat was better left on the hoof. When storms closed in, riders spread to search for a lee, then regrouped quickly by whistles and calls that cut through snow. Horses kept families mobile, which kept them fed. Movement created options, and options meant life when winter tried to trap the camp in place. Winter on the steppe required food that could live outside the fire. Mongolian families built a pantry of preserved dairy and meat that resisted rot, carried well, and delivered steady energy. Milk became a dozen foods that outlasted grass. Fresh milk soured into yogurt. Yogurt cooked into dried curds called arul, which lined the rafters on strings and hardened to pebble strength. Arul soaked in tea, softened into a dense meal. Butter was churned from cream and stored cool in skin bags, ready to enrich soups or fry dough. Mare's milk fermented into arag, a tart drink that lifted spirits and delivered quick calories without spoiling fast in the cold. Meat preservation was equally precise. Strips of mutton or horse were sliced thin and hung from roof poles where smoke and dry air cured them. The cold finished the work, turning the strips into light, durable rations. Bones simmered into stock, then the broth reduced to a concentrated gel that set in shallow trays. Frozen slabs were broken into chips and dropped into kettles to rebuild soup within minutes. Fat was rendered into tallow and stored in covered pots, then melted back into meals to slow digestion and extend warmth through long rides. Season-matched method. Dry wind meant jerky. Clear sun meant faster curds. When storms trapped families inside, food moved closer to the stove so gentle heat kept it usable. Clay jars held pickled items beside the hearth, raised on stones so mice in meltwater could not reach them. Nothing was discarded. We cleaned pots and flavored dough. Extra bones became tools or toggles for clothing. Preserved foods shaped daily rhythm. Riders could leave before dawn with a pouch of arul and a strip of meat, then meet the herd by first light. Supper was a pot of stock and dumplings that welcomed every traveler home. Stored energy in bags and rafters turned winter into a solvable problem. The Mongolian winter punished hesitation, yet careful design, steady movement, and smart stores turned cold into a known opponent. Knowledge, muscle, animals, and fire worked together, and the steppe yielded just enough for those who understood it. Modern comfort hides how fragile we've become. The Mongolians thrived in freezing wilderness through skill, community, and food that could outlast the season. Are you curious what kept them alive when the world turned to ice? Watch this next video and see how survival really tasted.